In the late 1800s, rumors started to surface in my home province of Alberta of two prospectors who were exploring the Rocky Mountains, coming across a mine so full of riches it would lead to the deaths of multiple explorers attempting to discover its lost location. Some say this story is just born from the lies of a madman, but others believe these rumors are well worth their weight in gold. Join me in this episode as we look into the dark history of a missing gold mine said to be chock full of fortune. Welcome back to Moonlight Lore, everyone. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Hopkins. In this episode, I'll be discussing a legendary gold mine located roughly 3 hours from where this podcast is being recorded that's told to hold so many riches it's enough to kill and to die for. Nestled in the Rocky Mountains, hidden and lost from the eyes of modern-day treasure hunters, lies a cave so full of gold it's said to contain $7 billion worth, or so the rumors say. As is often the case with many stories and tales coming from the Wild West gunslingers, prospectors, and frontiersmen, it can be hard to take what they have said as truth. This story, although well known, have had local historians and treasure seekers questioning the authenticity of it for years now. The Lost Lemon Mine, as it's named, has remained undiscovered for over 150 years from its initial discovery back in 1870. Trying to track down its location has proven to be increasingly difficult, as old western towns and trading posts are quite literally no longer on the map. Rivers and landmarks have had name changes, and for obvious reasons, anyone who was around back then is long dead, meaning that the story only survives in the dirt-covered old notebooks which survived for the past 150 years, that were kept and written in by the few living in the Wild West who had enough foresight to write down the events which took place around them. There were a few clippings from newspapers which had also survived and made a few mentions of names and locations regarding the lost mine, but the number of clippings regarding this information is less than desirable. And of course, the story survives by the countless people sharing the story while resting under the stars and surrounding their campfires, or those who would pass down the exciting tale to their curious kids while tucking them in for a night of sleep. So while many episodes in this podcast solely rely on what you, the listener, wish to believe, I want to emphasize the importance of taking this story with a grain of salt, as much of the details could have easily been distorted, twisted around, and exaggerated over the period of the past 150 years. To fully understand the story, we need to go back a few years ahead of it to grasp what life was like for prospectors who littered the mountains and streams searching for their fortunes. As men of many different characters traveled from the state of Montana and beyond to the provinces of British Columbia and Alberta, nearly all shared the same dream, striking it rich and going down in history. But starting out, these eager prospectors were typically quite poor. With only the money in their pockets as a means to live by, so many of these men were forced into living off the land in the harsh wilderness, oftentimes faced with freezing temperatures, starvation, and a plethora of other hazards that come from the painstaking work it takes to find their precious metals. For those who rise above the harsh conditions and setbacks the wild would relentlessly throw at these men, they would be given the opportunity to do what prospectors do best: hunt for their treasure. There are two ways the prospectors would then go about this. What most people commonly think of prospectors doing is panning for gold in flowing streams. This method is called placer mining, which were adopted and used mainly in the 19th century. During the harsher months of the year, the natural forces such as freezing temperatures, strong winds, and persistent flowing rivers erode and break up deposits of sand and gravel and stone, which can carry small amounts of gold and carry them downstream. Since gold is 19 times denser than water, the gold doesn't get very far down the stream or river before it settles on the gravel or sand resting on the bottom. With this being the case, most gold settles closely together, making it hard to determine where there is in fact gold resting on the bottom of the stream, but also if one is to find a few flakes of gold, one can expect to find much more in the immediate area. However, as simple as this sounds, it can be back-breaking work. One would need to shovel up gravel and sand from the bottom of the river and scoop it into a pan. The panner then needs to wash out the pan of the common rocks and gravel and use the water to swirl around the pan to clear out the undesired stones, allowing the gold to settle at the bottom of the pan. Spending day in and day out shoveling tons of gravel, meticulously screening the pan for any colors of gold, and then doing it all over again and again, one might not even come up with anything. And for those men with a bit of luck, they might uncover a few flakes, maybe weighing up to a total of an ounce or even less. In reality, as easy as it might sound, it was a very back-breaking and demoralizing process which amounted to very little payoff, if any at all. The second way prospectors would go about searching for gold is if they wished to skip the panning, they could take a more dangerous path, but much more rewarding. Hard rock mining, as it's called, refers to the practice of extracting gold from veins hidden underground and in the mountains, but this process takes a bit more work and machinery than placer mining. In the mountains and woods of British Columbia and the Yukon, much of the veins containing gold are made up from other minerals such as quartz or iron pyrites, which are commonly referred to as fool's gold. And extracting these minerals with the gold hiding inside is no easy task. Oftentimes it requires the prospectors and miners to dig out ramshackle mines in the earth, which by all means are in no way safe for anyone at any time to enter. But when they do this and come across a vein of quartz, which has been known to be the most common mineral to contain gold, they mine out the quartz, then transport it out of the mine, down the mountain, and to a mill to process it. The mill will then crush the large minerals down, freeing the gold trapped inside. This can result in much larger pieces of gold being found than placer mining practice, but requires more back-breaking work of mining with shovels and pickaxes, and also working in the very fragile and very dangerous quickly erected mines which could collapse from a simple wrong hit with a pick. So while both practices were incredibly difficult and very demoralizing, it didn't stop hundreds of men to flock to the Rocky Mountains in search for a richer future. And with so many men searching the hills, a few success stories did happen to emerge. Mines dug in the Williams Creek area in British Columbia had managed to produce a staggering $25 million worth of gold, and as more and more American prospectors traveled into the Great North, some tried their luck in Alberta. In the 1860s, miners near the North Saskatchewan River at Fort Edmonton uncovered a large gold deposit. And with word spreading like wildfire back in those days on any hint or clue where gold was, more and more people from across the provinces and Montana descended along the river. Unfortunately for these folks, the only gold recovered were very fine flakes and not worth very much. This was called flour gold, and with it being so small and weighing so little, it would take a single prospector to have scoured the water and to find hundreds of flakes for them to add up to a single cent. But as demoralizing as this was, it hadn't stopped the hundreds of men from traveling from all over to the North Saskatchewan River. And with the rumors and promises of gold being found here, this would be the motivating factor for our two primary characters in the story to come to the area. The story of the Lost Lemon Gold Mine is a long one with many twists and turns around every bend. If one doesn't follow a specific narrative following not only the lives of our main characters, but the lives of many other prospectors as well, it can lead those searching for the remnants of the lemon mine astray. In the spring of 1870, when the story begins, a large party of prospectors made their way north from Tobacco Plains to try their luck upon hearing the sudden discovery of gold found in the North Saskatchewan River. Upon arrival, the group of men began working tirelessly in the cold waters, hoping to just find a hint of color to satisfy their gold lust. As with being the case with so many prospectors at the time, the party of men came away empty-handed from the river, only walking away with wet clothes, empty pockets, and dashed hopes. But it's here where we meet our two primary characters who would go on to make the discovery of the lemon mine. Two prospectors, one named Lemon and his partner Blackjack, and yes, those were their names, broke off from the large party of men who had traveled up north and aimed to carve their own path of fortune. Lafayette French, a buffalo hunter and old-time trader, had staked out the two to join the original party heading to North Saskatchewan, and regarded the two as the pair who had originally discovered the Caribou goldfields in British Columbia a few years prior, and were two of the best prospectors the West had ever seen. So not surprisingly, people were eager to have these highly regarded, experienced and successful gold hunters on their team. And seeing how the party had not found any remnants of gold in the river, and seeing Lemon and Blackjack depart from the group, it caused more than a few of the other men to feel cheated from their success, and felt they had earned more after going through all the hoops of having these two superstars, as it were, there with them. But destiny would lead both Lemon and Blackjack down south later in the year, where they would travel with a band of Métis led by a man named Lanous. At the time, it was dangerous for two white men to be traveling alone, with constant raids from Blackfoot natives in the area, so arranging a deal with the Métis offered up both men quite a bit of protection. After a few weeks of travel, and now safely out of Blackfoot territory, Lemon and Blackjack separated from the band of Métis who were heading further south to Fort Standoff, just a little over 60 kilometers southwest of where the city of Lethbridge would be founded a few decades later, while Lemon and Blackjack would travel on an old First Nations lodgepole trail leading them up a river back towards Tobacco Plains where they came from earlier in the year. During the continued travels, Lemon and Blackjack, not having anywhere in particular to be at a certain time, decided to take the opportunity to attempt some placer mining along the mountain streams they traveled by. And with the help of their past experience and a bit of luck, the two managed to find a few hot spots along the streams. They would then go on to spend a few days in the mountains, enjoying their time in the wilderness and searching the rivers for any clues of the next big find. Until at one stop, the pair discovered quite the abundance of color in the water, scattered from the grass roots down to the bedrock. And now curious about this sign of another hotspot, the two approached the rock to investigate and to begin excavating with their picks. Upon clearing two sizable pits, Blackjack leading their two horses over from the picket line to haul some more stone out, and Lemon, still in the pit, brought down a heavy swing of his pickaxe upon a large ledge of stone. As the rocks crumbled, cracking open the earth, he discovered the find of a lifetime. With an incredibly loud yelp, Lemon cried out in joy as Blackjack dropped the horse reins and sprinted over to his partner who had just dropped his pick to the ground in disbelief of what he just found. Just sitting out of the rock face was a large solid piece of gold. They finally found the mother lode. Overly excited and beaming with joy, Lemon and Blackjack went straight to work to clear away more rubble and stone from their find, breaking off chunks of the precious metal to admire and appraise it. From their best estimate, they guessed these small chunks were already worth thousands of dollars, but they knew they needed a second opinion, as finding this much pure gold was beyond their expectations. Even with their years of past experience of searching and finding gold, this find was nothing they had ever encountered before. So, the pair packed up their gear and horse tack, surveyed the landmarks to find their way back to uncover more later, and rode as quickly as they could to the nearest trading post at Fort Benton. When the pair of prospectors arrived and pulled the lumps of gold out from their bags, the traders at Fort Benton were astonished. The traders looked over them, and after a while of inspection with both Lemon and Blackjack standing close by to keep watch over their treasure, the traders, determining they were indeed authentic gold and it wasn't a trick, told the pair they were indescribably rich with this find. Now, with what I could only imagine was pride and excitement beaming from the two, they left the traders and headed back into the mountains to celebrate their great luck. Though that night, while sitting around the burning campfire, things took a sudden turn. Nobody was quite sure what spawned it, but the two had gotten into an intense argument. As longtime partners, it most likely wasn't due to a dispute of who gets how much. But what Lemon would recount afterwards, it was caused by the disagreement of whether to stake the find and return in the following spring to recover their treasure, or to protect their find by camping at the site for the winter. Being as stubborn as a couple mules, these two prospectors couldn't come to a decision and decided to pick their argument back up in the morning. But as Blackjack settled into his sleeping bag, Lemon remained awake, thinking about the gold just waiting for him in those mountains. As he stared into the dying flames of his campfire, he thought of how all of his dreams were nearly in his grasp, how this gold would change his life. He'd never have to work another day in his life and be able to afford a large home with a warm bed. Why shouldn't he take it? Why should he have to suffer through another freezing winter, starving and cold? His eyes drifted from the smoldering wood of his fire and onto the illuminated body of his sleeping friend. Why should he have to share his fortune with him? While yes, he had a grubstake agreement filed with Blackjack and a trader, making it impossible for Lemon to cut Blackjack out of his share if he tried, if Blackjack were to suddenly die in an accident, the agreement would be annulled. Still, could he really do it? Kill his friend and partner over this? As Lemon's eyes were hypnotized by the flames and sparks flying through the dark sky and among the spruce trees, he knew what he needed to do. Silently, Lemon sat up, picked up his axe, and approached his unconscious friend. Blackjack was known to have a fast gun hand, and attempting to negotiate with him wasn't an option in Lemon's mind anymore. And as Lemon raised the pickaxe above his head, with the fire crackling behind him, hiding the sound of his heavy breathing, he brought down his axe right onto Blackjack's head, shattering his skull in a single blow. Sitting back down to the warmth of the fire, Lemon continued to stare, first at the fire, then at the body of his dead compatriot. He did what needed to be done. The gold was all his. But yet, it came at a terrible cost. Lemon did his best to avert his eyes away from the corpse of the man he called his friend, an innocent man who just moments before had been sleeping soundly next to him. A wave of guilt quickly rushed over Lemon as he stared. As the piercing silence of the night filled the small gaps in Lemon's head that weren't already filled with guilt, they were soon replaced with horror and panic. Leaping up from the ground, Lemon looked down at Blackjack's lifeless body, hoping to maybe see breath still in him. Hoping the deed he had just done hadn't worked and that his friend was still alive somehow. But as he watched the non-moving body, Lemon knew this was the reality created by his hands. Pacing back and forth around the fire, Lemon's panic began to take hold of his mentality. Growing madder by the minute, he struggled with his conscience and with the decision on what to do next. And realizing the darkness was surrounding not only his mind, but also his physical body, he quickly rushed to feed the hungry fire and sat near it, hoping to warm his freezing bones. When Lemon began piling more sticks and kindling in an attempt to warm up, he felt the wind pick up and blowing harder through the trees, as if Blackjack's angry spirit itself was returning to the site of his murder. While Lemon sat by his fire, trying to ignore the brushing branches and creaking trunks, his ears replaced the noise of howling wind with the noise of ghostly moans. Being alone in the dark with the body of his victim, and now what was very obvious the moans of the dead drifting through the trees, Lemon truly lost his mind. And as soon as the first light broke in the morning, Lemon saddled up and packed his gear and took off down the mountain. He rode his horse as fast as it would go and headed back down to Tobacco Plains, where he met an old friend of his who had been the priest in that town. Here Lemon would confess the story of finding the gold and killing his friend up in the mountains. The priest, although skeptical about this half-crazed rambling of his friend, knew something had gone terribly wrong considering the state of him. His worries would then be confirmed when Lemon threw down the proof he needed to know that his friend was telling the truth. Out of his pocket, Lemon tossed the large gold chunk at the feet of the priest. Patting the shoulder of his friend and assuring him that he would have this handled, the priest left his friend in the small church and called for Reverend John MacDougall, a mountain man who was very familiar with the territory Lemon and Blackjack were in. The priest explained the story and instructed MacDougall to head up into the mountains to find the corpse of Blackjack and to bury him, allowing his spirit to find peace and to be put at rest. I'm not sure if it was due to payment, as a favor, or out of sympathy, but MacDougall agreed and headed to the location up the mountain where Lemon described. After quite a bit of searching, MacDougall eventually found the body of Blackjack in the exact state Lemon had described it. He dug a shallow grave, placed Blackjack's body into its new resting place, and buried it, placing stones on top of the dirt to keep the prowling animals from digging it up. MacDougall rode back to Tobacco Plains to inform the priest his task was done, and to give comfort to Lemon in knowing his friend was now properly put to rest. This helped put Lemon's mind at ease a bit, and he decided to remain in Tobacco Plains for the winter, allowing him to spend time with the priest who did his best to comfort the mind of his now troubled friend. But all the reassuring and comforting words can only do so much, and as fate would have it, the allure of gold in the mountains and weight of the death of his friend was too much for Lemon's mind, causing him to slip in and out of madness throughout the entire winter. It wasn't until the break of spring did Lemon attempt to do something about it. By this time, word of such an incredible gold find spread like wildfire, and the eager waves of prospectors appeared in Tobacco Plains. With the snow of the following winter melting finally allowing passage through the mountains, Lemon, along with a large crew of men he handpicked to help him recover the treasure, marched out of town and back into those cursed hills. Scouring the coulees and hills proved to be harder than the men imagined. Lemon, having difficulty trying to backtrack and relocate the lost mine after months of stewing in madness back in Tobacco Plains, had caused more than a few of the other prospectors to become suspicious. They wondered if Lemon was truly mad and couldn't find the mine again, or if he might have lied about the amount he and Blackjack had found initially. He could just be leading everyone out on a wild goose chase, only to come back to collect the treasure himself once everyone else had given up. These thoughts crossed the mind of all these men, causing more than a few accusations and arguments to stir through the camp every night. No more than just a few quiet words spoken around the fire caused most of the men to distrust and hold a grudge towards the man leading them. Finally, after so many nights of being approached and blamed for the lack of gold for all the men there, Lemon's madness took hold of his mind again, and he became insane. The men of the camp took shifts keeping guard over Lemon stuck in his tent, and come morning, with a look of defeat on all their faces, the men escorted Lemon back to Tobacco Plains. With Lemon now basically out of the picture from this point on, and was unsuitable for the mountain expeditions, the priest who had comforted him through the winter decided he would attempt a search himself with the help of John MacDougall. MacDougall, who was at Fort Benton in Montana at the time, sent word to his friends back in Tobacco Plains he would rendezvous with them at Crow's Nest Lake, where he would then lead them to the site of Blackjack's murder, where they would attempt a search from there. So with the hopes of guidance from MacDougall, the outfit the priest put together made way towards Crow's Nest. MacDougall himself was already on the road north, but stopped at Fort Kipp along the way, which was a notorious whiskey fort. Now, for anyone unaccustomed to the life in the Wild West, would more than likely describe this fort as unsavory. It was a place set up for the purpose of taking advantage of the local Native Americans by buying their furs for as little money as possible, and doubled as an operation for brewing alcohol. It was during his stay MacDougall indulged himself in a truly toxic drink known as rotgut. It was strong, yes, but also cheap. It was described as a drink that could cause a grown man to go wild, or if consumed too much, would cause them to simply die. So if you're interested in making your own, here's what goes in it. 1 gallon of wine, 3 gallons of water, 1 quart of alcohol, 1 pound of chewing tobacco, a handful of red peppers, a full bottle of Jamaica ginger, and a quart of black molasses. And there you go, a recipe for a vile drink you can make at home. Though, for liability reasons, I guess I should mention that I don't recommend it. Anyways, MacDougall, having partook in the consumption of this drink, and obviously ignoring the daily dosage label, drank a little too much, causing him to end up being buried just outside the grounds of Fort Kipp, taking an incredibly vital clue with him on where the lemon mine could be. With John McDougall's passing, the priest from Tobacco Plains and his men would never truly know where the site of Blackjack's murder had taken place. And although they continued to search for it, following certain landmarks along the way, they never would find the burial site. This mystery has many more twists and turns in it to go into in just one episode, so I'll be breaking this topic into a part 2, and quite honestly maybe a part 3 or 4. There's just a lot to cover here. But like I've done in the past, I'll do my best to get the next part out next weekend. But as life is quite busy for me nowadays, I'm not going to promise anything. Just be sure to watch your feeds for the next episode. I'll be talking about more stories that took place after the passing of John McDougall, and share some more interesting facts regarding as to why it's so hard to recover this lost gold. So until then, be sure to give the podcast a 5-star review on iTunes or give a follow or subscription on whatever app you're listening on. If you're also interested, feel free to join me over on Instagram and give the podcast a follow there at Moonlightlorepodcast to see a bunch of pictures pertaining to the episodes I talk about on here. I also have a Twitter for the podcast, which I admittedly don't really use too much, but if I have any updates or news about the podcast, I'll be posting it there. If you have any friends or family who you think might be interested in this story or others I share here, be sure to invite them in. I'd love to have them. And one final thing, if you have a story of your own regarding the unknown or simply just want to say hi, you can DM me on Instagram or Twitter, or also email me at moonlightlorepodcast@gmail.com. So until next time everyone, keep your lanterns lit and keep exploring the unknown.